I want my money, Kody. The words tore through the courtroom like a bolt of lightning, cutting the silence into ribbons. For an instant, no one spoke. No one breathed. It was as if time itself had been pulled to a standstill, making every individual in that room wait with the shock of the words that had just been uttered. Robyn Brown was not whispering. She was not begging. She was demanding. Her voice motivated by a combination of betrayal and anger, and a heartache that was too much for one woman to bear. She stood firm at the plaintiff's table, her hands fisted at her sides, her eyes burning with an intensity that even the fluorescent lighting above could not extinguish. On the other side of the room, in the defense table, Kody Brown dipped his head. His golden curls fell over his face, casting it in shadows as it flushed red. His jaw was clamped shut, but his eyes would not look at hers. For the first time since this trial had started, the man who used to crow about being the leader of a vast family empire seemed fragile, small, cornered. The strains snapped like glass on the floor as murmurs broke out across the gallery. Onlookers leaned into each other, hands over mouths, their low tones humming like irritated bees. Even the jurors traded suspicious glances, their pens arrested halfway through a note. And there, in row 3 of the gallery, were 3 women whose lives became inextricably wound up in this tale: Meri, Christine, and Janelle. They weren't murmuring, they weren't shocked. They sat with arms folded or fingers laced, faces smeared with storms of feeling: resentment, tristesse, an odd feeling of cold satisfaction. For them, Robyn's words were no shock. They were affirmation of all they had endured, all they had cautioned against, all they had suffered at Kody's side. Christine leaned forward ever so slightly, lips twisting into the faintest hint of a bitter smile. Janelle shook her head, mouthing silently. Finally, it's coming out. Meri closed her trembling fingers over her lips, her eyes wide with years of grief. This was not Robyn's battle alone. It was the unwinding of a story in which they had all been complicit. At the front of the room, the judge, a gaunt older woman with piercing glasses sitting on her nose, leaned forward. Her voice was calm but authoritative, cutting through the room's murmur. "Mrs. Brown, the court needs honesty. What money are you talking about?" Robyn didn't blink. She didn't hesitate. She didn't even take a deep breath. She leaned slightly toward the judge, her voice shaking only with rage as she spat out her reply. "The money Kody stole, the money he guaranteed would make us secure, and the money he stashed when things started collapsing." The words fell like bombs, each one more massive than the previous one. Gasps echoed through the room, ringing off the wooden walls. A man in the back row grasped his chest. A woman near the aisle held her mouth in shock. A juror's pen dropped and hit the floor, but no one bent to retrieve it. This was no longer a divorce hearing. This was not about custody, or assets, or dividing property. This was an accusation, one that was public, a one that could destroy Kody Brown's image for good. Kody's attorney shifted nervously in his seat, shuffling through a stack of papers in hopes the questions were there somewhere. But Kody didn't stir. His head was still bent, his hands clasping the table so tightly his knuckles were white as bones. His silence cried out louder than any excuse he might make. Robyn stepped forward, her heels clicking against the shiny floor. Her voice broke, but it rang through the room with absolute authority. "I thought he loved me. I trusted him. I gave him my all, and he turned around and cheated on me." The gallery erupted into more murmurs, louder this time. The judge struck her gavel once, but even the hard crack of wood on wood couldn't stifle the gravity of what Robyn was speaking. She raised her hand and gestured across the room, straight at Kody. "You lied to me, Kody. You lied to all of us. You said we were creating something together. You said the money was for the family, for the future, but you were creating for yourself." Her voice cracked on the final word, and for a brief instant the mask of rage shattered. Tears welled in her eyes, shining as they quivered on the verge of falling. But she did not brush them away. She stood firm, chin upraised, compelling Kody to listen to each syllable of her anguish. The judge leaned back in her chair, brow furrowed. "Mr. Brown, do you wish to respond?" Cody's head twitched as if the question had shaken him out of a stupor. He raised his face slowly, eyes bloodshot, lips compressed in a thin line. He didn't glance at the judge. He didn't glance at the jury. His eyes settled on Robyn, and when he spoke, his voice was so low it almost dissolved under the humming lights. "Robyn, don't do this. Not here. Not like this." A roomful of gasps swept through the room. His words were not denial, nor were they defense. They were pleading. Fear, a desperate bid to bury something before it was too late. Christine moved in closer to Janelle, speaking loudly enough that those nearby could overhear. "You see that? That's guilt." The judge rapped her gavel once more. "Order in the court. We shall have no commentary from the spectators." But the harm had already been done. The jury had heard it. The cameras had recorded it. The world viewing would witness it. Kody Brown was not fighting to clear his name. He was begging to keep something under wraps. Robyn's lips curled into something between a smile and a grimace. She shook her head slowly, her tears finally spilling down her cheeks, though her voice only grew stronger. "Oh, I'm doing this here, Kody, because the truth doesn't belong in your house anymore. It belongs in front of the world." The courtroom exploded. Murmurs became gasps. Gasps became half-whispered shouts. Reporters were writing furiously in their notebooks, their pens scratching back and forth. Court artists sketched in earnest desperation, attempting to record the blaze in Robyn's eyes and the hysteria on Kody's. The judge pounded the gavel repeatedly. "Order, order in the court." But order was not to be had now, because every person in that room, every juror, every reporter, every ex-wife, every bystander, knew one thing for sure. Robyn hadn't merely accused Kody of stealing money. She had threatened something greater, something darker, something the world was on the cusp of hearing for the very first time. And that anticipation hung suspended like a storm cloud, weighing heavily on every chest, challenging anyone to breathe too loudly. Kody Brown rocked in his chair, his hands shaking as he pressed them against his temple. His mouth formed words, but no sound escaped. And in that quiet the world beheld a man who wasn't merely losing his marriage. He was losing his facade. And Robyn? She stood up straight and tall, no longer mere fourth wife, quiet and last to enter the narrative. She was the one ripping it wide open. The tale was no longer about polygamy. It was no longer about jealousy. It was no longer even about love. It was about betrayal, about deception, about money that had disappeared into darkness. And it all started with the words that rang like thunder on a sunny day. "I want my money, Kody." The courtroom was no longer quiet. The whispers, the gasps, the fidgeting movement of bodies. It all came crashing together like a storm battering against thin glass. The gavel had slammed down, but it was too late now. The mood had shifted. All attention shifted to Kody Brown, the self-proclaimed patriarch. The man who used to walk across television screens with authority and confidence, peddling the notion of a man with solutions, a man with vision. Now, he slumped at the defense table, shoulders hunched in, like a man recoiling from his own shadow. His hands trembled slightly as he turned his wedding ring, the little circle of gold revolving around his finger over and over. His face was white, his lips compressed into a thin line. And when his eyes darted to Robyn, there was no strength left in them, only fear. Robyn's words continued to echo in the air. "The money Kody took. The money he said would keep us secure. And the money he concealed when it all started to unravel." The gallery hummed with hushed talk. The jury wrote rapidly in their notebooks. Fingers of reporters tapped across keyboards, bringing the moment lived to the world beyond. At last, the judge's crisp voice cut through. "Mr. Brown, the court awaits your answer. Do you deny these allegations?" Kody's mouth opened, but no words would come. For an instant, his jaws worked silently, as a fish would suck in air on land. He swallowed hard, looked over at his lawyer, then at Robyn, who had not budged. She sat stiffly, her gaze fixed on him, unwavering, unrelenting. When Kody finally broke his silence, his voice was hoarse, trembling. "Robyn? Don't do this. Not here, not like this." Gasps rocked the room once more. He hadn't lied. He hadn't stood up, proclaimed innocence, banged his fist in indignation. He had pleaded. Christine crept closer to Janelle in the gallery, her lips twisting into a biting whisper. You see that? That's guilt. Janelle nodded once, clenching her jaw. Meri, sitting next to them, closed her eyes as if the sound of his voice reopened so much that had been hidden. The judge frowned, the gavel hovering above the block, but not falling yet. She watched him intently. Mr. Brown, the court is not concerned with personal entreaties. It is concerned with the fact. Did you or did you not hide money from your wife? Before Kody could answer, Robyn's lawyer stood, tall, confident, calm, the opposite of the man crumbling at the defense table. In his hand, he held a stack of folders, thick and heavy. He cleared his throat and spoke with the authority of someone holding a secret weapon. Your Honor, the plaintiff will demonstrate that Mr. Brown diverted family funds, transferred assets into accounts only he held, and misled my client for years. These are not unsubstantiated allegations. These are documented, calculated maneuvers of a man who utilized his position of authority to mislead. He paused for dramatic effect. Then he slammed the stack of folders onto the table with a loud, resounding thud. The sound startled Kody, who flinched, his head jerking upward. His lawyer quickly rose, his voice desperate, sharp. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is making wild, prejudicial claims, without evidence. Robyn's attorney didn't blink. He placed his hand on the folders and smiled coldly. Oh, the evidence is right here. Bank records, wire transfers, hidden accounts. We'll go through them one by one. Mr. Brown knows exactly what I'm talking about. The gallery came alive again, whispers zipping like sparks in a parched forest. Kody's attorney hurried around to him, squatting low to whisper in his ear. But Kody didn't react. His eyes were pinned on the pile of folders on the other table, his chest expanding and contracting more with each ticking second. He knew what they contained. The judge rocked back in her chair, her eyes cold as steel. This court will look at the evidence when the time comes. In the meantime, the defendant can respond to the accusation. Kody's Adam's apple bobbed as he gulped. His shaky hands skidded on the desk, hunting for something to hold on to. He mouthed open once more, but nothing emerged. He closed it, shifted, and attempted once more. At last, his voice broke into the stillness. He broke off, his voice cracking. He squeezed his eyes shut, and then attempted it again, louder this time, straining steadiness into his voice. I never stole from her. All I did, everything I did was for the family. A low murmur spread through the room. It wasn't a denial. It was an excuse. It was the sort of reply that generated more questions than it answered. Robyn's face tightened. She shook her head slowly, whispering to herself, but the microphone in front of her caught every word. No, Kody, that's the lie you've told yourself. And now you're telling it to them. Christine emitted a bitter cackle from the gallery, hard enough to turn heads. Janelle pressed a hand against Christine's arm to shut her up, but her own face was stern. Her lips clenched as if she bit back every memory she'd ever fought to forget. The judge's gavel came down once. Silence in the gallery. The next interruption will result in removal. But the silence that came after was oppressive, crushing, because nobody in the room was convinced by Kody's words. Not completely. Something in his tone was off. Something about his eyes was off. His hands kept shaking. Robyn's attorney moved forward once more, his tone even but with a cutting edge. Mr. Brown, if all you did was for the sake of the family, why are there accounts in your name that your wives never knew about? The courtroom burst apart. Gasps, screams, the gallery slouching forward like a wave, crashing against the beach. Kody's stance went rigid, his lips parted, but the words caught, gagged, choked in his throat. His attorney sprang to his feet, objecting loudly, his voice nearly desperate now, but the judge cut him off with a stern stare. This court will hear the evidence in due time. Sit down, counselor. Grudgingly, Kody's lawyer complied, leaning back in his chair, his face chalky. Every eye again turned to Kody. The cameras closed in. The jury listened with rapt attention, pens at the ready once more. The man who had once declared he ruled with power now sat shaking, vulnerable, his words disintegrating faster than he could stop them. Christine whispered once more, her tone frigid this time. This is it, he's finally cornered. Meri didn't say anything. She simply sat staring at Kody, her eyes unfocused, her fingers wrapped around the arm of her seat so hard her knuckles whitened. Janelle's jaw clenched, but her eyes never left his. They'd all been here before, in private, in silence, but now the world was witnessing it. And Robyn sat prim and upright, her chin angled, her gaze never wavering. The woman who had stood up for him, who had fought for him, was now the one stripping the mask from his face in public. The anticipation was agonizing. Everyone knew, this was more than just about money now. This was about truth, betrayal, secrets that were kept hidden for years. And for the first time, Kody Brown didn't appear like a husband, or a leader, or even a father. He appeared like a man on the verge of losing everything. The room in the courtroom changed again. Heavier, thicker, as if the burden of what was coming next weighed down each chest in the room. The judge shifted her keen gaze to the prosecution's table. Call your first witness. Robyn's lawyer stood up easily, his documents smoothed out, his voice steady but measured. The plaintiff calls Christine Brown. Christine. The gallery came to life immediately. Heads swiveled, whispers drifted. Some leaned in, others glanced at each other. Of all the wives, Christine was the one who had already escaped, already spoken publicly in interviews and in tears. But this wasn't TV. This wasn't gossip. This was a courtroom, and her words here would have the force of law. Christine rose slowly from her chair, her back straight, her chin up. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't seething. She was determined. With each step she took toward the witness stand that echoed across the wooden floor, steady and slow, like a drumbeat marching toward a finale. She set her hand on the Bible, took her oath, and sat. The courtroom leaned toward her as one. Mrs. Brown, Robyn's lawyer started. Tell the court what you went through, with regards to how Mr. Brown managed family finances. Christine spoke out loud and clear, but underneath was a shudder of anguish, the kind that results from years of keeping too much bottled up. I watched Kody give it all to Robyn. He'd say it was out of love, that it was about fairness, but it was always about her, the rest of us. We were told to do with less. We were told there was nothing left. But somehow there was always enough for Robyn. The jury scribbled hastily. Christine's eyes flicked toward Kody, who sat motionless, staring at the desk as though it might swallow him whole. She continued, her words sharper now. He once said to me that we were broke, that we couldn't pay for one of our children to get assistance, that we had to make a sacrifice. And then the same week, I watched him purchase Robyn a new car. I knew then what I had long suspected. He was lying. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Robyn bowed her head, her lips set firmly, the anguish of her own treachery growing with each statement Christine made. Kody shook his head, his lips moving, muttering something to his attorney, but Christine's voice rode over the buzz. Strong, unwavering. Now Robyn's discovering what we all did. When money's concerned, when trust is concerned, Kody never tells the full truth. He tells you the tale you want to believe, until it's in his best interest to revise it. And then bang, you have nothing. The room fell silent. Even the rustling of pens moving across paper ceased. Christine's words hung there like smoke, smothering, unescapable. At last Robyn's lawyer nodded. No more questions. The judge leaned toward the defense. Does the defense have any questions to cross-examine? Kody's lawyer fidgeted in his seat, obviously ill at ease, but stood nonetheless. His words were constricted, his questions hasty, nearly desperate. Mrs. Brown, isn't it a fact that in a large family sacrifices are made? That money must be carefully spent? Christine's face had set. Sacrifice? She snapped, her tone acidic. Yes, we all sacrificed. But one person never seemed to, and that was Kody. The lawyer took a seat. He knew better than to press on. Christine descended from the stand, her expression a mask of fortitude, but her hands shaking as she clasped them together. She sat back down beside Janelle and Meri, both of whom gave her little nods of support. The judge glanced back to the prosecution. Call your next witness. Robyn's attorney stood once more. The plaintiff calls Janelle Brown. Janelle stood, her demeanor unlike Christine's. Where Christine wore pain, Janelle wore command. She moved with purpose, step by step, quiet and deliberate. If Christine testified from the heart, Janelle was to testify by cold, hard logic. Once she had sworn her oath, she relaxed against the witness stand, her documents already tidily arranged in her lap. Mrs. Brown, the attorney began. What do you know regarding Mr. Brown's financial decisions? Janelle's voice was steady, near businesslike. Kody oversaw every account. He dictated to us what we could and could not spend. But here's the thing. Never once did he present us with the books. He said there was no money, but we couldn't check it out for ourselves. He kept everything to himself. The jury nodded minutely, their pens moving again. Janelle went on, her eyes closing slightly. I hold a degree in finance. I know how to read numbers. I know when figures don't add up. And with Kody, nothing ever added up. Money was lost. Promises were broken. He designed a system where only he had the keys. Robyn's head swiveled toward Janelle. Now her face conflicted between sorrow and understanding. She was hearing the truth from the women who had gone before her. The truth she'd refused to believe, until it slapped her in the face. Janelle leaned forward a bit, her voice even, unflinching. If Robyn is demanding her money, she should realize she isn't the first. She's just the last to realize. Kody has been playing this game for decades. The only thing different now is that the world gets to see it. Gasps again. Some in the jury even glanced toward Kody, whose face was now slick with sweat. He shook his head slowly, whispering under his breath. But his words were inaudible. Robyn's lawyer smiled faintly. No further questions. Kody's attorney stood quickly, clearly trying to gain back some control. Mrs. Brown, isn't it possible you're simply bitter over the breakdown of your marriage? Janelle's answer came fast, sharp as glass. Bitterness does not steal bank accounts. The courtroom exploded in muttering once more. The judge hammered the gavel, twice. Be quiet. This is your last warning. Janelle descended, a look of tranquility on her face, her gait even. She sat back down, putting her hand softly on Christine's. For a moment of mutual support, the judge looked at the prosecution again. Call your next witness. Robyn's attorney's voice echoed out once more. Plaintiff calls Meri Brown. The room had collectively caught its breath. Meri had always been the quiet one, the forgotten one, the one who lingered on the longest, even when all was falling apart. But now, she stood up from her chair with shaking hands, her footing unsteady as she made her way to the stand. She took her oath, her voice cracking on the last syllable. When she sat, she grasped the arms of the chair, as if holding herself together. Mrs. Brown, the attorney started gently. What can you say to the court about Mr. Brown's promises of money and trust? Meri's gaze darted to Kody, and for a beat she couldn't continue. Her lips shook. At last, she spoke, her voice rough. He once told me that family comes first, that we would always be provided for. That's what made me stay so long, because I thought so. I thought that we were all that. A tear fell down her cheek, and she wiped it away hastily. But in the end, family was just a word he used when he needed something. And when we needed something from him, there was always nothing. The room was silent, each word hanging in the air. Even the judge's harsh look softened a little. As Meri went on, Kody didn't steal money. He stole trust. He stole years of devotion. He broke us, and now Robyn is getting to experience what we all learned the hard way. Her voice broke, but she continued. He doesn't owe Robyn money. He owes us all chunks of our lives we can't reclaim. Gasps erupted in the courtroom. Christine clapped her hand over her mouth, her eyes welling up with tears. Janelle slowly nodded, her face serious, her eyes shining. Robyn wiped away tears, but she didn't glance away from Meri. Not once. The judge's gavel came down once more. This court will preserve order. Meri bowed her head, her tears streaming now, as she climbed down from the witness stand. She made her way back to her chair beside the others, where Christine took her hand and squeezed it. The three women sat together, bound not only in grief, but in reality, and Kody. He was seated in the defense table, slumped, his face pale as a ghost. The testimonies had cut into him like knives, one deconstruction at a time, peeling away each layer of the narrative he had constructed for so long. He no longer seemed a leader. He seemed a man drowning, struggling to breathe as the world watched him go under. The judge addressed the plaintiff's attorney. "Do you have another witness?" The lawyer nodded deliberately, his eyes sparkling with the promise of things to come. "Yes, Your Honor. But before that, we have evidence." And so the suspense became heavier once again. The courtroom air had become so thick that it pressed down on the chest of everyone. Each witness had been another nail driven into the defense of Kody, each phrase tugging away the mask that he had worn for so long. But still he remained seated, obstinate, jaw clamped hard, fists balled as if he could prevent the truth from trickling from his fingers. But then, it did. The moment of breaking. The judge, who had been paying attention, turned her eyes towards Kody. Her voice was steady, calm but biting enough to slice through the air. "Mr. Brown, you've heard the testimonies. You've heard the accusations. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" The room came to a standstill. Everyone's gaze was fixed on Kody. Cameras zoomed in, filming every flicker in his face, every bead of sweat dripping down his temple. This was his opportunity to stand up, to explain, to deny. But for the first time in his life, Kody Brown looked helpless. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his throat constricted. He looked at Robyn, her eyes blazing with betrayal, and then at Meri, Janelle, and Christine, women who gave him their loyalty, their love, and years of their lives. At last, he spoke. His voice was low, his throat cracked, shaking. "You think I stole from you, all of you. But you don't understand. You never understood what it was like to have to carry this family." Meri nodded forward, whispering bitterly at Christine. "Carry us, he left us." Kody's words tumbled out now, urgent, like a man racing to construct a wall before the flood demolishes it. "Do you think money just appeared? Do you think raising 18 kids was free? I did what I had to do. I moved money. I shifted accounts. I made choices none of you could understand. I didn't steal. It was survival." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge seemed caught between disbelief and curiosity. Robyn stood, her voice cutting through his defense. "Survival? You call this survival? Kody, you took money out of accounts without warning us. His freight came to us free. You guaranteed us security. But you left us floundering while you lived in a palace." Kody snapped back, his anger rising, fury finally overflowing. "Don't act like you didn't gain. Robyn, you had the largest house. You received the most assistance. Don't stand there and play the victim." The audience gasped. The mask was stripped away. Kody's serene, practiced facade crumbled in seconds, leaving in its wake raw, naked rage. Christine leapt to her feet, no longer able to contain herself. The judge held up a hand for her to be quiet, but she pushed on, her words trembling. "You didn't just take money, Kody. You took our lives. You convinced us that we were creating something together, but it was all about you, always you." The judge at last brought down his gavel. "Order. Sit down, Mrs. Brown." Christine sat reluctantly, but the words hung in the air like smoke. Kody sat back in his chair, chest laboring, eyes flicking from one woman to the other. He could see it now. There was no salvaging this. No charm, no apologies, no manipulation could erase the gravity of their words. And then, Robyn pulled out a set of documents from her attorney's folder and held them aloft for the court to view. "Your Honor," she declared sternly, "these are accountings Kody never revealed. Accounts in his individual name. Accounts into which money flowed, was secreted away, and spent. This is not survival. This is betrayal." The judge's gaze narrowed. She signaled for the bailiff to take the documents. Rustling paper filled the air as copies were distributed to the jury. Kody's face paled. His lips opened slightly, but he had no words. His secret was out. It was evidence. The audience broke out in whispers, some even gasping loudly. Christine grasped Janelle's hand in a tight clasp, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. Meri closed her eyes, mumbling a prayer under her breath. The judge's face tilted forward, her voice somber. Mr. Brown, these records indicate transactions that contradict directly what you had previously stated. Assuming they are true, they are not only a deception against your wives, but also possible fraud. You must clear yourself. Now. He was in the spotlight. Cameras closed in. Tension filled the air. A heavy silence. Kody swallowed hard. His shaking hands clutched on the table, but his words, when they were spoken, were little more than a breath. I can't. The room exploded. Gasps, whispers, sobs. The judge pounded her gavel in rage, demanding order, but it was done. Kody's silence was more forceful than any admission. Robyn's eyes welled up with tears. Not of weakness but of grim satisfaction. She had waited years for this. And now, the truth was undeniable. The judge let out a breath, her voice icy and final. This court will reconvene tomorrow. Mr. Brown, you are hereby instructed not to leave the state until this case is decided. The gavel crashed like thunder. The courtroom erupted into pandemonium. Journalists dashing for the doors. Onlookers chattering, Meri sobbing uncontrollably, Christine shouting off towards the corridor. And at the epicenter of it all was Kody Brown, pale, broken and alone. His empire of deceit crumbling at his feet. The following morning, the courthouse was filled to capacity. Over a night of whispers, news had spread, and reporters clogged the door like vultures sensing the kill. Camera lights were ready and locked inside, humming with the anticipation of millions eager to learn Kody Brown's destiny. For so long he had been the one in control. The husband, the boss, the one who assumed he knew everything. Now, though, he was in the defendant's chair, slumped shoulders, sunken eyes. There were no wives sitting next to him, no children standing behind him to show support. He was alone. The judge entered, the hem of her robe flowing behind her, as she sat. Once the gavel came down, restoring order to the court. This court has examined the evidence, the testimonies, and the accounting records laid out yesterday. She started, her tone authoritative, ringing out in the quiet. The charges made by Mrs. Robyn Brown, and corroborated by Mrs. Meri Brown, Mrs. Christine Brown, and Mrs. Janelle Brown, are so serious that they cannot be disregarded. All eyes were on Kody. He shifted uncomfortably, holding the side of the table as if it could support him. Robyn sat rigidly, her hands clasped in front of her, her attorney speaking quietly into her ear. Meri, Janelle, and Christine sat en masse on the other bench, together for the first time in years. Their faces said it all. Pain, anger, but relief too. The judge went on. These records presented before this court indicate a clear trend of concealed accounts and illegal transfers. Mr. Brown, you stated these were done in the survival of your family. But evidence indicates that the money was not utilized to sustain your family as a whole, but to sustain your own lifestyle and show preferential treatment to one wife over the others. Gasps emanated from the crowd. The cameras closed in on Kody's face, pale, rigid, and frightened. Christine's eyes welled up with tears. She grasped Janelle's hand, whispering, "It's finally happening." The judge wasn't done. Her voice became more pointed. "Mr. Brown, this court finds your behavior not only irresponsible, but fraudulent. You took advantage of the trust of those most close to you. And though this is not a criminal case, the issue of fraud will be referred to the appropriate authorities for further investigation." The words are like a sledgehammer. Fraud, investigation. Kody's head fell, his blonde hair falling over his face. His lips quivered, but he didn't say a word. The judge addressed the wives. Regarding division of the assets, this court decrees that all marital money held in common be divided on an equal basis among Mrs. Meri Brown, Mrs. Christine Brown, Mrs. Janelle Brown, and Mrs. Robyn Brown. Mr. Brown, you are commanded to make complete disclosure of your finances within 30 days. Your failure to do so will be held as contempt of court. Applause erupted from the spectators before the gavel slammed again. Order, the judge barked, though a small smile tugged at her lips. Robyn let out a shaky breath, tears streaming down her face. For once they weren't tears of manipulation or fear, they were tears of victory. She had fought back, and she had won. Christine leaned toward Meri and Janelle, whispering, "We're free. Finally free." But Kody? He sat motionless, his world disintegrating. He had been the sun around whom his wives revolved for years. But now, in the presence of the entire world, that sun had fallen. He was no longer the leader. He was no longer the protector. He was no longer the husband. He was just a man laid bare. The judge made one last proclamation. "This court is adjourned." The gavel struck. The sound resonated like a funeral bell. The aftermath? The courtroom descended into pandemonium. Journalists poured onto the benches, bellowing questions, cameras clicking continuously. "Robyn, how are you feeling after the decision? Meri, will you ever forgive him? Christine, do you think justice was done? Kody, what's next for you?" Kody staggered as he made an attempt to depart the bench, his attorney leading him through the mass of microphones. His complexion was ashen, his eyes bloodshot. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. Robyn emerged amid the reporters, surrounded by her attorney who kept her away from the camera flashes. Nevertheless, she gave herself one sentence, her voice firm, clear, and cutting. "All I ever wanted was the truth." The words cut deeper than any decree. Meri, Janelle, and Christine walked away in tandem, arm in arm, the cameras filming the solidarity that once seemed unattainable. They didn't give any statement to the media, but in silence, they had a louder voice. For the first time in decades, they appeared liberated. Kody's fall that night. Every news station carried the story. Social media exploded with clips of Robyn's accusations, Christine's fiery outburst, and the moment Kody admitted, "I can't." Memes flooded the internet. Headlines screamed, "Kody Brown exposed in court. Fraud, betrayal, and the end of sister wives." The truth about Kody finally revealed. In a single day, the man who had built a life on control and image had lost it all. He alone sat in a dark room, the light from the TV shining off his vacant eyes as the news ran his embarrassment repeatedly. His phone rang non-stop with missed calls, lawyers, reporters, even furious texts from his children. But he couldn't respond. He couldn't bear it. For the first time, Kody Brown was quiet. The final twist a week later. The headlines were hit by an even greater shock. The authorities had now officially opened an investigation into Kody's finances. The secret accounts, the missing money, the trail of funds, it was no longer family business. It was criminal. It was legal. And Kody Brown, once the patriarch of a large family, now stood facing the very real potential for handcuffs and jail bars. The women, they progressed, both of them. No longer held back by his rules, manipulation, or control. For the first time, they had their lives again. And Robyn, the wife who everyone assumed would always shield him, was the one who dealt the final blow. The closing line, YouTube style. And so, in that quiet courtroom, the truth at last escaped. Robyn demanded her money. The other wives demanded justice. And Kody Brown, all he had left was the rubble of his deceptions. Because in the end, no matter how mighty you think you are, no secret remains a secret forever.